Did you think your song and dance and your superstition would help you, Eli? I am the third revelation. We're brothers! We're brothers! I'm finished.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Let's Take 5, the podcast where we take a cinema legend, take 5 of their films, and have their excellence and range. My name's Austin Luger.
My name is Eric Martindale.
And we are here for one of our final episodes of Let's Take 5. We're not just taking a filmmaker or an actor this time, we're taking 10 great films that we had not covered previously in the podcast. And in previous weeks we have done films like The Good and Bad, the Ugly, Amadeus, and Die Hard. This week we are covering the 1988 film by Martin Scorsese, The Last Temptation of Christ. This is him reuniting with writer Paul Schrader, and it stars Willem Dafoe as Jesus and Harvey Keitel as Judas, covering the final days of Christ as he is struggling with what it is to be a man and a god, and avoiding and knowing the inevitability of having to go to the cross to die. This is an incredible film. It's something that Scorsese wanted to make his entire career, really. He struggled for lots of reasons, financial and controversy. And when it came out, it was still filled with controversy to its final days. Blockbuster never carried it. It's the weird trivia. Like they thought it was blasphemous. And that's crazy to me because it's actually, I think, one of the greatest, like truly greatest religious films ever made.
Yeah, my wife is a Catholic. We watched Last Temptation of Christ. She thought it was great, loves it. Jesus comes out looking good in this film.
Oh yeah,
like it's not
big time.
He's definitely the hero of the movie. So that's kind of an interesting thing about it. I mean, the book was shrouded in controversy first, and then the movie followed. I had a professor in college who we tried to get on for the Othello podcast, but he was a theater history professor, and he went to the premiere of this movie in New York City, and he was there at the premiere, and he goes in down the thing, and he's going into the thing. He got hit with a tomato on his way in. So
shit.
Yeah. So it was definitely controversial when it came out, but obviously from people who did not see the movie, or because it's, again, Jesus comes out looking good, and it's always something that's sort of always fascinated me too, is this idea that, okay, so in this particular faith, in Christianity, you have a God who became mortal, has a son, but is literally divinity, and the struggle between what that would mean to be that, and the responsibility that would come with that, whether you believe it or not, talking just truly from thinking about that awesome responsibility. This guy is God, right? So he has work to do, but he's also limited in the sense that he is a man that has to eat. He has to drink. He has to have a job, a shitty job, building crucifixes. Try that irony on for size. And he has friends, and he has a mom, and all these other things that he has to deal with. When you think about like the most base things that humans need, he would need them because he's a man. And this book and subsequently the film just expands on those ideas. He still dies on the cross.
Oh yeah.
Christianity is still able to exist. It's really hard to imagine why this movie is. I mean, it's not hard to imagine why it's controversial, but at the same time, it still shouldn't be controversial. You know what I mean? So
absolutely, because to me, it's such a true understanding of Jesus as that kind of contradiction's not the right character. It's a internal combination that is conflicting him in such a dramatic way, because like I remember like when I was in Sunday school and you would have all these stories in the New Testament as they teach you, and you have things, Jesus giving a parable, nativity scene, Easter, all these kind of things, and the one that always like threw me off because it felt so out of character with the rest of them was him with the moneylenders in the church, which is
that
really
throws
well
off a lot of people, actually. Yeah,
because there's not a lot of context, especially in Sunday school. They go, oh yeah, love the neighbor, love that neighbor, love that neighbor, love the neighbor. fuck these guys, throwing the tables up. And it's really well done here because you have someone who is struggling to kind of really focus on love over any other kind of answer. And this is when he is the most human. And I love that the scene isn't like so like obnoxious, because I mean this is still the writer director combo who did like Taxi Driver. They can get really gross if they want to, but when they're in the scene in this movie, you have like him talking to a guy, and they do actually bring up why this is happening, because there's an exchange rate and there's still like a Roman xenophobia kind of going on. But like, are you making a profit? And he goes, it's fair. Is this going to be like a good day for you? It's going to be a fair day for me. Like, it's a bit of a smirk, but it is still enough to go like, there is a profit in general. That's what caused him to start kicking over these tables.
Right.
And
in his father's house.
Yeah,
that's
father's
part
house.
of it.
This
too.
is supposed to be a place of worship.
Yeah.
And that kind of like is such a moment where it's called Last Temptation of Christ for a reason. You're kind of being tempted by sometimes his anger. You know, there's a moment where it could be a baptism of fire, and he chooses not to do it, kind of thing. He's trying so hard to do the literally the righteous thing.
Yeah, well, he's figuring that out too, right? Through he doesn't the magic side of Jesus is removed here, because you have the human element in there of him deciding what should I do? You know, how am I going to do this? And part of it is he's making it up on the fly. Now he's making the right decisions because, you know, he's Christ.
Yeah.
But still, though, there's this constant conflict of, I know God loves me, I know that I'm this thing, but how does that manifest? How do I do it correctly? And the responsibility that he has. And then it just comes to it. It's like he knows he has to preach, for instance, but like he doesn't know what he's going to say. And he just gets up there and starts talking, and bingo, he knows what to say, you know?
Yeah. And the role, and this is brilliant of Scorsese, like the role of God is so present and non-present. There's never a voice of God, but there is this element of, you kind of have these internal struggles that you kind of hear with Jesus, but you don't hear God instructing him. You just have him torn, not knowing if he should die, but if he dies, he will come back in 3 days. He says that aloud. He's never been told that, something he just kind of knows, in the way he knows like what to say when this is happening or what to do when he's there. But it's still struggling. Unlike
Lucifer, who's very much a character in the film, and
yes,
talking to him all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what an amazing, like, because there's no giant red figure with cloven hooves and horns in this.
No, in fact,
a child or fire.
And in fact, prior to the ending of the film, where you have, which is we'll get to, but that's the more controversial part of the film, is actually just following the stories biblically. I mean, literally, no one who found these movies controversial, there's no way they could think the first hour and a half of this film is, because it just tells the story of the Bible for the most part. Like,
yeah, I mean, like, as long as
all the miracles are there, you know, every single one, him going out to the desert, fasting is there, the devil showing up as a serpent, like, this is all here.
People are like, oh, but there's nudity at John the Baptist. Yeah, that's also in the Bible.
Yeah. How shocking! How blasphemous!
They were all like going nuts by the river.
yeah. Well, right. So you have that, and you have, I mean, the only things that are really, I guess, maybe a little like startling is that, you know, you have like Harvey Keitel playing Judas, which is pretty weird.
Man, he studied for months about that accent.
Yeah,
he decided to go with New York.
I mean, he's good, but it's like,
it would be more distracting if he did an accent. I like him in this.
Yeah,
I know people hate him in this.
Yeah, I know.
I actually do like him because Willem Dafoe is playing such an incredible performance of the duality of God and man and conflict as a man of peace, but also he could fight Spider-Man, which is kind of in every Willem Dafoe performance.
Yeah,
this guy could be a horrible menace.
Yeah,
and that is kind of such a brilliant casting, because it's able to do that and still have this kind of divine peace to him while he's struggling. Willem Dafoe, I just love the way they depicted Judas, because the other disciples are like not characters in this movie.
Yeah,
you know, they have like the doubting Thomas has like that 10-second scene basically.
And Peter's around because Peter needs to be, because he's kind of like leader, disciple. So,
yeah. But
they don't really have much.
Because essentially, and this is like what a disciple does, they're yes men.
Yeah.
And Judas is such a great thing because while Jesus is struggling with this contradiction, he needs someone to kind of bounce his ideas off of. And it's a lot better for him to kind of come to a decision if you have someone who is questioning what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about, like, Judas is ripe for, like, stories and nuance because, like, okay, so Judas betrays Jesus. I think everyone knows that, at least in the West, for the most part. Mm-hmm. And then Judas, he did it for silver. He then throws the silver back, and then he kills himself out of guilt. But the whole thing that I always come to is, like, without Judas, there's no Christianity. Mm-hmm. So that had to happen.
Yeah.
That betrayal, like, had to happen. And this movie addresses that very specifically in a really neat way, but that's something that it's not in the Bible. It doesn't say that, you know, like Jesus said, you're going to have to turn me in or this is not going to work. But there is an element of that I always thought growing up, being raised in, I wouldn't say I was raised in a Christian household. My parents wanted me to go to church, but they didn't. Mm-hmm. But it was a good thing to go to church. It was just, we didn't. So, but like, you know, growing up where I kind of grew up, which is a largely Protestant community, you'd hear these stories, and one of the biggest ones I always had is like, but you just needed to do this, you know, like,
or the plot stops.
Yeah, the plot stops. Like Pilate needs to do this, and Judas needs to do this, and so like they're not really villains because this has to happen. We're glad this happened, right? You know, so that's the one thing, and I'm sure someone more biblically inclined could explain that to me, but that's something I always thought about,
especially since at this point in this movie, like Jesus knows the timetable that's going on, and it's kind of him. He knows it has to happen, and then of course we get to the final third. But you mentioned Pontius Pilate for a second, so I have to talk about that.
Of course,
I love David Bowie as an actor.
Yeah, I was going to say David Bowie is Pontius Pilate. Yeah. That needs to be talked about.
And because Bowie did like more acting than people kind of realize. He was in a number of really good films, but man, the guy's a natural screen presence.
Yeah, and
the character of Pilate is difficult because I said it is technically villainous because it is leading towards putting Christ on the cross. But he plays it so like nonchalant, like, well, if you show me a miracle, it's all over. Like, well, and having like a political discussion back and forth as well.
And again, kind of, it's hard to see where the outrage is because this is kind of supported by the Bible as well. I mean, you know, Pontius Pilate basically did everything he could not to crucify Jesus. Yeah, he didn't want to do that.
Gave the public an option.
Yeah, gave the public an option, thinking, well, surely this will work, and it doesn't. So, you know, like, so you have these characters in them that, what they're villainous, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know why this is controversial. At least, they expanded on the Judas plot a little bit by having Jesus explicitly tell him, "You need to betray me." But that's stuff that I've thought about anyway. Yeah, I mean, you know. We're humans, you know, even if you believe in the higher being that is God, that is the Christian God, you have to, the rational human being in you has to think about certain things. It can't just be like nodding your head. It's reasonable to wonder how someone like Judas ends up in hell for doing what needed to happen. That Jesus knew was going to happen. And then, of course, that gets into the whole thing about, you know, free will versus, you know, fate and how, if God is an all-knowing being, do you actually have free will and whatnot? But that's something that I've always thought about, and the movie addresses it specifically. So to me, it's not controversial. It just sort of fits and makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's better storytelling to have Judas be a three-dimensional person than just like someone in the back going, just waiting for my moment.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he would have been anyway, because Judas does, in the Bible even, throw the silver back. Yeah. And does kill himself. Yeah. So, like, he obviously...
But even if you were, like, told to kill your Lord... They had the great part in there of, like him telling, like, I don't want to do this. And he was like, would you be able to betray your master? And he goes, no. Because, like, in the same way of, like, my master is God. Your master is also God. So, tough.
the sunglasses come down
Yes.
and the Snoop Dogg music plays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's all done. And something I really love about this movie is that like it is flashy in a way that's almost not flashy at all. The whole thing was shot in Morocco, and it is still Scorsese directing, but it isn't. You would be surprised to go, oh, this is the guy who made like Taxi Driver or Goodfellas. But there is such a the camera is always dynamic, but never ever flashy. There's never like shots that go away from what's going on. But what I love about what he does, as he does so well in so many of his films, is that he just creates a sense of place and community. Because like when you read these stories, and they are just like, you know, individual stories in the Bible, you don't get a sense of like, where do they eat breakfast? You know? And this movie just has them kind of walk around and live their life while having the discussions, and you get a better sense of what the world was like at that time.
Yeah.
And it's so rich, especially when you have like things that are gross and disgusting, like, you know, the blood coming out of the building and whatnot. But you get like these nice moments between people, and it's really, really well imagined.
Yeah, one of the things that I think probably we just need to talk about is I think this is the fourth Martin Scorsese film we've done. So we did Taxi Driver, we did Raging Bull, we did Aviator. So,
that's right.
So
yeah.
I think this is the fourth. So we didn't quite have 5 Scorsese films, and obviously Scorsese is someone you could do 10, 15 films on. So when you're picking one for the final 10, you know, how do you spin the wheel and sort of end up on Last Temptation of Christ when you have films like, you know, Goodfellas out there?
Yeah.
And I think the answer that I think might shock a lot of people is I think I'm speaking for you here too, is the matter of fact here is that Martin Scorsese is one of the greatest directors of all time, and one of his greatest movies is Last Temptation of Christ.
Absolutely.
It is in that echelon of that top tier that doesn't get a lot of airplay. You know, people don't talk about that very much, but when I look at the list of Aviator, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and Last Temptation, and when we walk away from this podcast saying we never did Scorsese, and those are the four Scorsese films, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I am.
Well, especially because, like, to me, someone who didn't grow up Catholic, it wasn't even, like, had, like, my best friends growing up as Catholic, so it wasn't even, like, Catholic adjacent in any way. I've always been really fascinated by Scorsese's his career and life is tied into his Catholic upbringing.
In a lot of his films, yeah.
I mean, the first great film he made,
Mean Streets,
starring Harvey Keitel, who's Jesus in this film, is really all about a guy who wants to get out of the mob because of his Catholic guilt.
Yeah, Catholic guilt is the
and it's just that kind of idea of sin and righteousness that drives so much of his films. And when he addresses it directly, you're just in awe, I feel. This movie and Silence are
underrated,
amazing movies. Yeah, Silence. It's weird no one like saw that one.
No one saw that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another one that he spent like his whole career. He wanted to make like Last Temptation, Silence. He still wants to make a Sinatra biopic, which still never made, and Gangs of New York, like the ones he's like been trying forever.
I walked out of well, you know what? I think Gangs of New York's the worst of the ones that were made.
Gangs of New York's not very good.
You know, it just, the problem with Gangs of New York is the movie starts at an 8 out of 10, and that's the entire movie. There's no peaks and valleys. It's just this 8 out of 10, never climaxes. Just this 8 out of 10 intensity.
Yeah.
I don't mean like quality. I mean intensity. It starts at an 8 out of 10 intensity, and you think it's going to go higher, but it's just one plateau. It's like the Cliffs of Moher. The movie ends, and then it's just a sea. Like, that's like what it is.
The most fun part of the movie is it's most casual, like Election Day. It's
yeah, Election Day is the best part.
And like that's the one, like it's going like, okay, now we're going to be less intense because it's different.
Yeah,
it's
that's
funny.
true. It's like, yeah, I don't know how to describe it. But anyway, so the Last Temptation of Christ, we ended on that one of the Scorsese films, and I think that's a good one to end on, and also one that I would have picked for a 5 that we would have done a Scorsese anyway, and I'm sure you would have too. Sad we didn't get Mean Streets. There's certainly some other ones on there, but I want to talk about the last third of the film.
We have to.
Yeah, I have to.
It's the title.
So yeah, so Jesus goes up on the cross. He's getting crucified. This is how the story ends, right? Well, no, because some being approaches him, says, you can come down off the cross now. He's, of course, very hesitant about this at first. First, he comes off the cross, and he's like, no, you did what Christ needed to do. It's this really kind of creepy scene. It's like, you've done what needed to be done. The mission is accomplished. Everyone's going to be a Christian now, and you can just go live your normal life. And then we see him live that normal life with his wife, and he has children, and Jesus having children and having a wife. This is the big controversial part of the film. But here's why it shouldn't be, because it's not fucking what happened. The whole thing is not what fucking happened. It's his last temptation. It's what could have been. It's the last temptation of Christ by Lucifer for him to give up the quest. Because, as is established in the film and during the sequence, if he doesn't die on the cross, Christianity dies with him. There will be no Christianity. There is no religion. And him, upon realizing this, abandons the last temptation, goes back on the cross, flashes back to that day. He's back on the cross, and he completes the mission. He dies.
Yeah.
That's what needed to happen. So why is everyone so pissed off about this?
I think,
he didn't actually have children. That's not actually what happened. It's this idea that, Jesus, the idea that Jesus would be tempted by such a thing. But that's the point of the movie, is that he is both God and man. So he has to reconcile what it means to be a man with what it means to be God. And guess what? He chose to, he made the right choice.
It's not like this whole scene is filmed like Wolf of Wall Street. Now he's just like sending like crazy. No, it's still filmed as like, because so much of the film like really struck me because when we had these conversations with Judas, he's like, I try to like think of like hateful words to say, and what always comes out is love. Like he just keeps wanting to focus on love and these kind of connections. And when he has the early temptations, when he's fasting, you have the serpent speak to him and you have the fire speak to him. Those don't work as well because it is kind of going towards like hate, anger, and fear. But what they kind of learn more is that like his biggest fear is the loneliness that he's feeling, that and able to connect to love without being loved back. He knows that God loves him, as he says, but like it's not the same because he has to now die alone. Yeah. And so they have the temptation be, you get to live, because that's what scares him. It's what scares him in the Bible. He goes to the garden of something that's hard to pronounce.
So he prays for hours and he sweats blood and
and you have this, and this is what he really wants. He wants to kind of have these things.
And the thing is, like, even in the Bible, in the scripture, Jesus prays in the last 12 hours to take this, God, please take this chalice from me. Yeah. Does not want to, because guess what? That sucks.
Yeah.
Getting crucified probably sucks. Never done it. Don't want to try it. This is in the Bible, okay, that he does that. He goes up on the cross, and while he's being nailed, he shouts, or he's up, he says, why, God, why have you forsaken me? Because the brutalization of Jesus is so brutal that God literally can't watch, right? Like, it's bad. This is a bad way to die. And naturally...
not only just death, it's crucifixion.
It's crucifixion, and he knows, even with knowing that he's going to be back in 3 days, and he's going to go to heaven, and that's going to be gnarly. He can't... The human element says, oh my God, I'm getting crucified in 12 hours. Is there some other way to do this? And the answer is there's no other way, so what does he do? He does it.
And what's so brilliant about that final... long sequence, which is truly like amazing filmmaking, because it has the warmth he was looking for, but also this like unnerving sense that it's never even close to being like a horror film, but you feel that something's off, partly because it's part of the story you've not heard before. And
good point.
They mention death earlier because you have the story with Lazarus, the man that Jesus resurrected, and you have this kind of really chilling moment when you have when you have Harry Dean Stanton as this Roman guy who talks to him, and he believes. So what was better, life or death? And Lazarus, who doesn't look great because he died recently, said it's about the same. And that like answer like really chills Harry Dean Stanton. So he has to stab him. Because also can't have a miracle walking around.
Well, I was going to say also, they had to cover up Jesus' miracles, right? But knowing that the miracle did happen, that's the weird thing. Is it's like
the miracle scenes are really cool because like the one of like the water to wine is so nonchalant.
Yeah,
because also it's
go check them again.
Yeah, go check them again.
Yeah,
I love that Judas even know it happened.
Yeah.
Juice is sitting next to him, just like eating.
Yeah.
Because like it's like if you like asked the waiter for like something else, and I just didn't notice because I'm just like enjoying my meal. That's what happened if it was a miracle. And like that's kind of like what was going on, and to have this final sequence and for it to be so emotional. But in this part that I really got this viewing, it's probably my third or fourth viewing. If the devil was being very successful, this whole sequence would be just dandy. Like a perfect utopian answer, all good. But you get to see the failure of him leaving play out in this alternate world, right?
Mm-hmm. Also, at the end of this, he dies anyway. Yeah. That's a realization he has too.
Yeah.
Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, and there's no Easter moment in this movie. It's really interesting. Mm-hmm. But like when you have like him like talking to what's his face? The guy who's preaching, going like this all happened, but it didn't really happen. To me, I think that actually is a bit of the presence of God. God is able to show himself and to show his mission for betterment through suffering, which is kind of goes into why Jesus has to die. Jesus snaps out of the alternate reality essentially because he sees failure, disappointment, and sorrow, which had to have been there from someone who isn't the devil. Right. I guess. If we're going like sci-fi notions of how.
No, that's a good point.
And it's just a weird thing because like even like to me one of the most like impressive visuals in the movie is so purposely not impressive because when he does die, there are these flashes of colors that for a second you think it's like 2001 because like okay we're going to do Through the Infinity, but it's not. It's incredibly low key. It's more of like when you like look at the sun too long and you kind of like put your eyes a little bit and you get little dots. That's it, but it's Christ dying.
Yeah,
it is so like it's so visually mute's the wrong word. It's so quiet, but it is this moment of like something extraordinary supernatural happens as well. Yeah, it's such a fascinating choice that anyone else would have messed up, including myself. Like 100% would mess it up.
Willem Dafoe's really good in this movie.
So good in this movie. I just
can't be easy to play Jesus.
No,
no, and play well. I know a lot of people have, but
he just feels like so much. But the world, it just feels very tangible.
Mm-hmm. He feels like, and he feels like what it needed to be in the sense that like he feels like a Jesus you can sort of reach out and touch. Where like I'm just gonna bring it up as the easiest example. Passion of Christ, Jim Caviezel. I mean, he is very, very like holy.
Yes,
in that film, like, and I actually think that movie's pretty good. But
I haven't rewatched it since theaters, and probably won't.
Yeah. I haven't watched it since theaters either, but I remember thinking it was pretty good. And Jim Caviezel I thought was excellent in it, because he's an awesome actor. But it's just completely different Jesus, right? Like,
yeah, because it's so easy to play the like, I'm going to speak quietly, and and then just talk on the hill. I like that Willem Dafoe is so human in this. Like when he kind of has his first like sermon, he's he kind of jumps in too early to explain what he's saying.
Yeah,
it's like you get that I'm like this, and you guys are the rocks, right? Like, this is a great parable.
Yeah, I'm great at this.
Yeah, this is so good.
I'm gonna create a religion.
I'm gonna give you the footnotes right away.
Yeah, that's true.
No, I think this is a really beautiful film and something that. If you only think Scorsese makes gangster films, you'd be very surprised that some of his films actually are really emotional. And I love this film. It's powerful.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, if I were, it's like I said. I mean, sure. I'll put Raging Bull up there on my Martin Scorsese list of great films everywhere. I'll have Raging Bull there, and somewhere around there I'll have Goodfellas. Definitely have Mean Streets on there, but I have a space. I have a space carved out for Last Temptation, Departed, Last Temptation though as well. So it only gets better, I think, every time I see it. Whereas like some of his films and get worse. Like Departed was like the greatest thing I'd ever seen, and now it's just like it's a really good movie. I've come down to earth, but this film, no pun intended, this film is, every time I watch it, it gets better and better.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the chance to revisit and talk about it with you. We'll be back next week with another discussion of difficulties with father-son relationships. The Royal Tenenbaums we have next week.
That's one way of putting it.
Yep. Trying to leave a transition and stumbled on my way.
That's quite a time jump.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, this is 1988. We're going to go to 2001's The Royal Tenenbaums. So. Until then, you can go to theartofmore.com, check out all the past 127 episodes that we've done of this show, plus all the bonus ones.
You want to hear Eric cry, next week's probably the episode.
The Royal Tenenbaum, yeah. We'll get some Nico score that.
We get the Nico going and talk about like shitty families and still love each other.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Oh, go pace yourself.
Yeah, pace myself.
Get hydrated for next week. But leave us a review on iTunes. Tell people about the show. Follow us on Twitter at the Immortals Pod. Follow the other podcasts over at the Art Immortal, including the Immortals and Ad Absurdum. And where can we find you?
Constant Diversion is my YouTube channel.
All right.
Leave it at that.
We'll be back next week. Until then, I'm Austin Digger.
I'm Eric Martindale.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right. Tell me what you tell people on the streets.
The prophet Daniel had a vision. A tall statue had a gold head and silver shoulders. The stomach was bronze, the legs were iron, the feet were clay. A stone was thrown. The clay feet broke and the statue collapsed.
Yes?
You see, God threw the stone. The stone's me. In Rome.
Rome is the statue.
Yes.
So your kingdom, or your world, will replace Rome. Where is it?
My kingdom? It's not here. Not on Earth.
It wouldn't be, would it? You know, it's one thing to want to change the way that people live, but you want to change how they think, how they feel.
All I'm saying is that change will happen with love, not with killing.
Either way, it's dangerous. It's against Rome. It's against the way the world is. And killing or loving, it's all the same. It simply doesn't matter how you want to change things. We don't want them changed. You do understand what has to happen. We have a space for you up on Golgotha. 3,000 skulls there by now. Probably more. Guard! I do wish you people would go out and count them sometime. Maybe you'd learn a lesson. No. Probably not.